Welcome to Under One Roof MTL, where we're demystifying homeownership one episode at a time. Today, by the way, we're going to be speaking about succession planning with John Lambrinos from BLD Wealth Management, so stay tuned for that in about 15 minutes from now. But first, let's introduce ourselves. My name's Robin Flynn. We're with you until 1 p.m., joined as always by the fantastic three, the trio that is here to save the day and provide you with all the information that you need. LJ Aguinaga of LJ Realties. Hi, LJ.
How you doing, Robin?
Very, very well. Fred Pichette from Fred and Martin Mortgages. Fred, welcome back. Nice to have you.
Thank you, Robin.
And Martin Spalding, the other half of Fred and Martin Mortgages. Hey, Martin.
Hey, crew.
Super great to be with you on this beautiful Sunday. Happy Mother's Day, by the way, to all the mothers that are celebrating in various capacities. Hope you have a lovely day and you feel celebrated. Let's start with our trivia question of the week, though, brought to you by Felix and Norton Cookies. You can visit their store at the Blue Haven Shopping Center, 3705 St. John's Boulevard in DDO. If you are the first person to text in the correct response to 514-800, you'll receive delicious Felix and Norton Cookies delivered straight to your door. Our question this week: what is the name of the government agency responsible for overseeing real estate transactions and enforcing regulations in Quebec? We will accept just the acronym. You don't have to type the whole thing out if you don't want to. 514-800. Please do include your first name as well. Martin, you're not allowed to guess. You know the answer.
I don't want to guess, but I'm just thinking, what a great gift for Mother's Day than a box of cookies from Felix and Norton.
Absolutely. I can't think of anyone who would deserve a box of cookies more than a mom.
Exactly.
Moms are the real heroes in our lives. Everybody knows that. Guys, let's chat a little bit about what's in the news this week besides Mother's Day. Some good news to kick things off. Montreal home sales were up 27% in April. LJ, you want to walk us through some of that?
For sure. Okay, so sales were up 27%, which means that that's how much more properties were sold in that month. Sales volume was up 35%, and that represents the pricing essentially. So total volume, total sales from that perspective. Next, we can move on to prices. Prices are up anywhere from 4 to 6%, depending on the category. Are we talking about a single-family home, a condo, or a multiplex? But again, very good news. This is when we're comparing April 2024 to April 2023, so basically the same month in the previous year. Now, we're seeing more listings hit the market, but there's more buyers out there to absorb it. So it hasn't been a problem. It's not like there's been a shift in that regard. It's been very much running together. And the other fun statistic that we saw released was days on market for single-family homes is down to 56 days. And this is a drop of a week, 7 days, which is the largest drop I've seen in probably the last 12 to 18 months, to be quite honest. So it's really highlighting the fact that things are moving. Sellers are listing their properties. Buyers are really excited to see these new properties on the market. Things are going in the right direction. If you are a homeowner, your property value is back up. It's super exciting. We could keep talking about it on the show, the fact that you're building equity, building for your retirement, and this is just highlighting the fact that we're continuing to do that and that our market has been very, very strong in this regard. And I think a little bit later we're going to talk about the rental market that's also been incredibly strong. So if you do own a multifamily or an investment property, you've seen great returns on that front as well.
What do we attribute this increase to, LJ? Does this have anything is this like normal for spring where people are just more in the mood or what's going on?
So yes, it's normal for spring, but that being said, we're comparing spring last year, right? We're talking about April 2024 to April 2023. So that would take that into account. What's really highlighted here is the fact that interest rates have stayed very stable. And even though it's not what we wanted, we keep talking about wanting them to come down, obviously, and they haven't quite come down to where we'd want them to be, but they've been stable. And this stability has really increased consumer confidence. Everyone's saying, you know what? We finally believe that it's not going to go back up, that we are heading in the right direction. And people are starting to understand that in the next few months, call it the next 6 to 12 months, when interest rates do come back down, well, there's going to be more competition and prices are going to go upwards. So if you're in a position to start looking at buying, and you probably have been for the last year or two, and you've been holding off because of the high interest rates that we saw, and because you were concerned about what was going to happen, where all the chips going to fall, people have been coming back into the market because of that. So consumer confidence is really what I attribute it to. Inflation's been down, it's heading in the right direction, and interest rates have been stable.
So are you saying that people are accepting the new reality of the mortgage rates that we're seeing currently? Or are people anticipating that mortgage rates are going to come down? And we've been saying this a lot over the last couple of weeks, get in the market.
I'm seeing both, right? So it's a combination of understanding. I mean, after hearing me say enough times that 5% for the 5-year term is the historic average for Canadian mortgage. Like, we're at average it's understandable that we can't keep fighting this and thinking that, oh, we're going to get back to 1.8% or 2.5%. This is normal. So we should embrace the fact that this is normal and embrace even further the fact that as rates do come down a little bit more, then pricing is going to go up. I was speaking to a client of mine who purchased mid last year. He wanted to take advantage, obviously, of the fact that prices were a bit compressed. And we had said, you know what, by next year, when everything stabilizes a little bit, I'm sure you're going to see at least a 10 to 15% increase in your property value. And a recent property just sold next to his. It sold for 25% more than he purchased last year. Wow. So people are really factoring this in right now.
LJ, I think a lot of people are still on the sideline because of the interest rate. What's your thought about it? Because we're getting a lot of people calling us to get pre-approved lately, but a lot of people seems to want to wait until really making an offer or really looking for a property. Is that something that you see on your side?
I think it depends what we're comparing as a metric, right? I think you and I, Fred, have been doing this for long enough that if we remember 2021, 2022, 100%, you have more people on the sideline right now than we did back then. But I'm really focusing on what 2023 brought to us. And I'd say that there was a lot more people on the sideline there. And we're seeing a lot more people enter the market now, have the conversations. Last year, people didn't even call to get pre-approved because they heard 7% interest rates, 6-point-something% interest rates. So they didn't even open the conversation realistically, whereas now they're opening the conversation. A lot of our clients are obviously executing by getting accepted offers, starting to visit properties. And I think that trend's going to continue over the next few months.
Because listings are up, do you feel that there's going to be any downward pressure on price, or prices are going to stay stable or continue increasing?
With listings being up right now, one would assume that there's going to be downward pressure, but because we keep having more and more buyers enter the market with the addition of properties, it's kind of balancing out. There's a lot of people who've been telling me for the last few months, LJ, there's no inventory. I've seen everything that's on the market. I don't see anything that I like. And obviously, as new things get added to the market, well, these buyers who've been waiting and kind of really observing the market are picking it up.
Makes a lot of sense. Guys, the CMHC released their annual report this week. It's a hefty one. They reflected on the challenges and successes of the Canadian housing market. So what stood out to you guys from this report? Martin, I know you read this whole thing cover to cover, right?
You know me. I go cover to cover. So the two things that really jumped out at me were the building stats and rents. So if we look at the building stats, we're underachieving what Canada really needs. In 2023, we delivered 153,000 units, and those were new, repaired, or assisted affordable housing units. Their target was 120, but their real target is 550,000 per year. So even if we delivered 153,000 and overachieved their own targets, we're well below what we need.
On that front, Martin, why is it that we're seeing one entity kind of quote that our target is 120,000 units, and another entity is quoting 550,000 units? Where is this disconnect? Which one's saying what, and why aren't they on the same page if this is really what Canada needs as a whole?
Well, I mean, there was another stat that came out at the same time where they're saying that in 24 and 25, the Canadian population is still expected to grow by 800,000 on a yearly basis. So immigration is up. Building starts are down in the sense that financing new projects and also finding skilled workers because there is a real issue with labor right now. You know, I hate to say this word, but it's almost like a perfect storm. Everybody wants to come to Canada, but we got nowhere to live.
LJ, I have a theory on this. So when I have a client that I'm working with for social media, whenever we are setting our key performance indicators every month, I always undershoot. You know, if I think that they're going to grow by 5% every month, I'll set our target at 2 to 3%. So every month when they grow by 5, they're happy. I think that the target was set at 120,000 because they knew they could overshoot it and hit that 150.
There's another stat that was in one of the articles you sent us, Robin, that says there's one housing start for every 4.9 people entering the working age population. So when you start to work, one of the first things you want to buy yourself is a house. So we're looking at 1 for 5, and actually the stats hold up. So if you look at, we're building 120,000 units. That's the target. But what we really need is 550. The ratios are pretty much similar.
That makes a lot of sense. You also mentioned rent stood out to you from the report, Martin.
All right. So the rent. So the vacancy rate is at its lowest on record, 1.5% in Montreal, and rent prices are soaring. So the average rent price for a 2-bedroom, this is across Canada, is now over $2,000. So we've been saying this over and over again. If you're looking for a place come July 1st, you got to start looking now. And Fred actually in our pre-meeting said it's already too late. LJ, I know that you manage a lot of properties. What are you seeing right now?
Look, we definitely still have some units available for July 1st. I wouldn't say it's too late, but there's definitely some fierce competition. There's people who are out there looking every day right now, and it's very interesting to see where some people are looking for July 1st, and we even have some people asking, is it available immediately? So they're recently arrived in Montreal, and they need a place to live. They're usually showing up with their family and ready to kind of set up camp right away, to be quite honest. So it's not too late. There are still properties becoming available, but I usually tell people who are looking for rentals to start the process at least 3 months in advance, and we're definitely beyond that threshold.
Just one quick question. Is there such a thing as a bidding war for rentals?
You know what? We had one property that we have received 9 offers on a couple weeks ago, and it ended up going for over asking, believe it or not. It's not a common thing. We'll sometimes see multiple applications, and a lot of people will just respect the asking price, but every once in a while, somebody wants to kind of make sure they secure the property, and they'll go over.
I actually have an interesting anecdote to share on this, so we'll get to that a little bit later. Up next, we're going to be joined by John Lambrinos. He's a wealth management advisor with National Bank, but first the time is 12:15. So we're going to hand things off to Jill Fitzgerald. She's over at the CJD 800 Traffic Center. This is your lingo lexicon on Under One Roof MTL. Title search. A title search is a thorough examination of public records to determine the legal ownership of a property and uncover any existing liens, encumbrances, or other claims on the property's title. It's typically conducted by a title company or real estate lawyer during the home buying process to ensure that the seller has the legal right to transfer ownership of the property to the buyer. For example, let's say Melissa is in the process of buying a condo in Kirkland. Her real estate lawyer will perform a title search to confirm that the seller has clear and marketable title to the property. Assuming the search reveals that there are no outstanding liens or encumbrances on the condo, the sale can go through and Melissa has peace of mind, knowing that she will have undisputed ownership of the property after closing. This has been your Lingo Lexicon on Under One Roof MTL. Do you know what happens to your house and your assets when you leave this mortal coil? Have you given any thought at all about how you'd like your wealth to be transferred to your kids or maybe your grandkids? Have you considered everything that comes with passing down real estate assets to the next generation? Navigating legal complexities, mitigating taxes, managing family dynamics along the way. It's complicated. Thankfully, we have John Lambrinos here. He is a chartered investment manager and financial planner with BLD Wealth Management, part of National Bank Financial, and he joins us now. Hi, John.
Hi, Robin. How are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for being here. It's a lot to consider. I mentioned sort of quickly some of the things that you have to think about, but you're the expert here. What are some of the most common challenges that you see?
I mean, there are a few common challenges. One of the big ones is procrastination. A lot of people don't see the need of doing a will or thinking about that till later on. But in the meantime, you never know what can happen. And when you do make a will, you want to make sure it's clear and concise and that your wishes are truly carried out and that your legacy can continue the way that you had hoped for.
Actually, John, it's interesting because a lot of people, when you say procrastination, a lot of people don't have wills. And what happens to your assets? What happens to your home if you do not have a will in Quebec?
In Quebec, basically the Quebec Civil Code determines what happens to your assets. So in the case that you're married, but there's no testamentary clause in your marriage contract, then the assets will be split between your wife and your kids. If you don't have kids, your closest relatives. So it could be left that your spouse actually has not the full estate in that case.
John, a lot of people are concerned about the federal government change to the capital gain tax. How can family plan ahead to mitigate that tax liability?
There's a few things you can do. On the personal level, it's a little bit easier to navigate than the corporate because you still have a buffer of $250,000 per year where the capital gains remains at 50%. So you can be proactive and try and take some gains before death so that there's not a huge tax bill at the end. The other thing you can do is if you really want to protect the full value of your estate, the best way to do it and make sure that you leg exactly what you want to each beneficiary is to take insurance, either to cover a big debt like a mortgage on your real estate assets, or to make sure that each beneficiary receives exactly what you intended they did receive without having the impact of any taxes.
Are you talking about life insurance? Or are you talking about asset insurance? What kind of insurance are you talking about?
Life insurance, yes. The best way would be a permanent life insurance, which guarantees an amount of death.
John, I have a question for you. In your experience, what are some of the most effective ways to facilitate communication and manage potential conflicts among family members during the real estate succession planning journey? We know that it's usually a very stressful time for people. What do you see be successful?
I think one of the biggest things is to have an open communication with family members on what your intentions are. We see a lot of times where at death there are certain surprises. There's infighting between family because it's not understood why this was left to this person, this was left to this person, why did they get this? At the end of the day, you should sit down with your family, explain to them your reasoning, why you're doing what you're doing. It can't be that one family member has more needs than another. Maybe there's a disability, maybe one has some trouble in life. I mean, there are ways to mitigate that without having to leave something directly in the will. You can always set up a trust upon death to control your funds even after death. So that's one way to go around it as well. But I think communication is very important.
In conversation with John Lambrinos, we're chatting a little bit about succession planning. LJ?
Do you find that, does it happen regularly that the people who are inheriting the balance of it are surprised by what's left behind? Is this usually almost like a hidden box almost with the information?
I would say 1 out of 2 almost. It's
Wow.
Yeah, I think
50%.
I mean, yes, because a lot of listen, whether you have a will, some people don't. Some people haven't had a clear will, so it's left up to ambiguities. So then it's basically the liquidator who has to basically determine what is meant by the will. So it can be challenged. You don't want that. So, what I recommend often is to maybe have even 2 executors and one that's a third party that has no direct benefit from the estate. It can be a trust service like National Bank Trust. It can be a notary. It could be a trusted friend, but someone who has no interest in the estate. That would avoid conflicts of interest.
And on that note, when we're leaving behind the will, is it something that we have to do formally with notary? Can I just write this on the back of a newspaper or napkin, if you will? What does that look like?
I mean, you could. I mean, technically it's a legal contract, but if it's not written up correctly, then it will be challenged in court. So if you want to make sure that it's not challenged, it's better to get it notarized.
So this might sound like a silly question, but there's a commercial on television right now where either the lawyer or the notary is actually reading out the will, and the country house has been left to a cat. Have you ever come across something as insane as that when you I know you're not a notary, I know you're not a lawyer, but I'm sure you've come across some insane things that have been legged or left behind to individuals that the family go, oh my God, I can't believe he just did that or she just did that.
I mean, there are situations. I mean, I guess it depends on your perspective. I mean, some people will leave everything to charity and nothing to their family, which can be a shock as well. And listen, I've done my will. Got married a few years ago, just had a kid last year. And I have a dog. I mean, I'm leaving $25,000 to a dog charity. I mean, for me, it's part of the family, right? So I guess it depends on your perspective.
In conversation with John Lambrinos, we're chatting a little bit about succession planning. I have a question before you, John, before we wrap up. In Quebec, it's very common for couples to not get married. Common law partnerships are the norm in this province. Does that complicate things for succession planning if you don't have a clear plan in place before you pass away?
It does. The one thing is that if it falls under the family patrimony rules, you still have rights to whatever fell under the use of the family. So you still have rights to the home and any assets that were used for family. But yes, everything else would be in limbo.
John Lambrinos, he is a chartered investment manager and financial planner with BLD Wealth Management within National Bank Financial. If people want to get in touch with you, John, how can they reach you?
Email, john.lambrinos, john.lambrinos @bnc.ca. We also have a website, fbngp.ca/BLD.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate it. It's been very illuminating. Still to come, what happens when a tenant decides they aren't renewing their lease? What are their rights and responsibilities? And What can the landlord do to ensure a smooth transition into their next tenant? We'll discuss after the news.
What are the advantages of working with a mortgage broker? This is your Mortgage Minute. Mortgage brokers offer numerous advantages. They have access to multiple lenders, some of which may not be available to the public, enhancing your loan choices. Their expert guidance helps you navigate the complex mortgage landscape, ensuring you understand all terms and conditions. Brokers save you time by handling the comparison of rates and terms from different lenders. They also provide customized solutions that match your financial situation and goals. Their services are usually free to you as they are compensated by the lenders. Furthermore, brokers have the negotiation power to secure better rates and terms due to their extensive business with lenders. Lastly, they reduce stress by managing the entire application process and coordinating with all involved parties.
You're listening to Under One Roof MTL on CJD 800. I'm Robin, that's Fred, that's Martin, that's LJ. We're with you until 1 p.m. I mentioned a little earlier when we were talking about bidding wars for rental properties. A friend of mine recently moved from Montreal to Toronto. She got a really great job offer. It took her almost 9 months to find an apartment. And she applied for many apartments, but she kept being outbid. People were offering the landlord to pay 6 months of rent up front, just, stuff that she couldn't afford. Finally, she ended up, the apartment that she found, she had to pay 3 months of rent up front before she could get that apartment, which is crazy. Do you see that same kind of stuff happening here, LJ?
No, we've never seen things of that nature. Obviously, people who are recently arrived and they want to try and secure their application because they don't have a credit history, they'll sometimes offer a month of security deposit. I've even seen, obviously, 2 months security deposit plus for a month of rent. So I've seen that. But it's really under the context of I don't have credit history and I understand that you don't have a reason to trust me. And therefore, I want to provide this as a backing for myself. But in general, no, we're not going to see somebody offer 6 months. We'll have sometimes somebody say, oh, I'll pay 6 months up front or 12 months up front, but because they're looking for a deal. So if the asking rent is, let's say, $2,500, they say, oh, I want to sign it for $2,250, but I'll give you 6 months or 12 months up front. That I've received in the past, and most landlords say, no, thank you, it's okay. I'll take my monthly check and call it a day. But yeah.
Are there any legalities around these things? Like, can a landlord actually sit back and say, the asking price is $2,000, but the highest bidder take all? And is the landlord permitted to ask for 3 to 6 months rent up front and so on and so forth? What are the legalities? What if a listener is out there looking for a place? We want to inform them so they go in eyes wide open.
So the legalities on the security deposit, let's start with that. So in Quebec, it is technically illegal to ask for a security deposit. You are allowed to ask for the prepayment of the first month's rent to secure the property. That makes sense, obviously, because if you're signing a lease, they want to make sure they've at least collected first month's rent in the event that you do not show up. Now, a tenant is allowed to voluntarily offer a security deposit, whether it's for pets, whether it's because the property comes fully furnished, whether it's because they realize that they don't have a strong credit score or any credit in Canada and they want to basically beef up their application. But technically speaking, a landlord cannot require it. And in the event that the landlord tried to require it, the tenant is allowed to simply ask for it back at any point in time, and the landlord would have to oblige. In the same respect, even if they do have a security deposit, at the end of the lease, if there is damage, it doesn't mean that the landlord can automatically keep it for it. They still need to get a judgment from rental board in order to use those funds against any damage on the property. So the OACIQ actually just released a publication on this yesterday. I'm happy to share the link if anybody needs to, but I sent it to my team yesterday, actually, and it was interesting to see another little article written on exactly how this works.
LJ, quick question for you. How does it work to choose between different applicants when they're looking to rent one of your unit, let's say? How do you manage that?
There's a couple of different things that we'll do, right? So the first thing, it comes down to fit. To be quite honest, our property managers or our brokers who are on the file, the first thing I'll always ask them is, how did the person seem? Does it seem like somebody who's going to be clean, polite, well-kept, organized? Obviously, we're going to build a long-term relationship with these people, and we're looking for a good relationship. So how presentable you are is going to play a huge role and weight as to how this is going to go. And then we'll obviously send everybody a application. On the application form, they're telling us where they're living right now, who their landlord is, where they're working, what their salaries are. And then we can go back and obviously cross-reference all of this information. From there, we'll also do a credit check to see how are their debts right now, what are their payment habits. We'll also verify their criminal records, and we'll also verify their rental board record. So when you put all of these factors together, you have a pretty good idea who you're getting into business with.
Matt, you've been at this for a while. Do you have any bad tenant horror stories for us?
Bad tenant horror stories. I mean, look, there's always going to be a bad apple here and there. I wouldn't call it a horror story per se. I've had tenants who definitely, I mean, I have 2 tenants I've seen create a grow up in a property. So I had to go deal with that, obviously get the cops involved, have it cleaned up, then do the renovation for the property. This is now going over 10 years ago, so it was definitely a while back, but I've seen that happen. I've obviously seen tenants not pay. I've seen tenants flee the country. I've seen a variety of different things, and that's why the security deposit from people who are not necessarily Canadian, who don't have established credit, is a good safety blanket because it gives you some sort of funds, essentially, if they do decide to leave the property, whether they leave it in good state, bad state, at least you have something in hand to help you restabilize the property.
There's an expression called midnight moves. And have midnight moves ever happened to you, LJ?
I don't know if I'd call it a midnight move, but sure. I mean, we definitely had a tenant who was there and was paying rent and then stopped paying rent. Did they leave at midnight or did they just leave without letting us know? I couldn't tell you. But we've definitely had 2 tenants, I think, over the last 16 years kind of just disappear. And then we have to go to the rental board, open up the case. They don't show up, obviously. Lease gets canceled. And then we put the collection notice out and we hope for the best at that point.
Gotcha.
You're listening to Under One Roof MTL on CJD 800. Guys, I saw an interesting tweet this week. So a friend of mine let his landlord know months in advance that he was not going to be renewing his lease. Everything standard, typical. But in the last month, his landlord has scheduled 20 apartment visits. Now, he works from home. He also has a young child who I believe is 2.5 years old. So it can be tricky to clear out, for 20 visits. Is that excessive? What should tenants know about what their rights and obligations are? I understand you have to let your landlord show the apartment so they can find a new tenant, but at what point does it become excessive?
The reality is the civil code states that with the 24-hour notice, you're allowed to enter the property at any point in time. And obviously to show the property for potential rental makes a lot of sense. Now, it's in everyone's best interest to try and maintain the relationship as smooth as possible. So what we'll usually try to do is create a visit block. Hey, everybody, we're going to be showing the property on Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m., on Wednesday night from 6 to 8 p.m., et cetera, et cetera. And it makes it easier for the people showing the property, it makes it easier for the tenants, and it kind of makes things smoother. Obviously, we do that early on, and then if we haven't found a tenant after the first 2-3 weeks, we become a little bit more flexible and try and get anybody who's interested in the property to see it. Now, we don't usually struggle with that issue on our end because we have full photos of the entire property. Sometimes we'll have floor plans of the property, very thorough descriptions, square footage, etc. So people know what they're coming to see. But if somebody goes on Facebook Marketplace and posts 3 photos of the property and they're not exactly doing it justice, it's not uncommon I mean, people are going to feel catfished and they might say, oh, I expected it to be a lot more renovated, but you just showed me the renovated bathroom. The kitchen doesn't look like this at all, etc. So there's definitely a lot of work that can be done to mitigate. Unfortunately, it is the landlord's right to come in as often as possible, but it's not in his best interest to have to show up there 45 times either, right? It's a big waste of time for everybody.
Is there a level of expectation that the tenant will clean the place up before you bring in a potential tenant? Or have you ever had to send in a cleanup crew so that it was visit worthy?
Look, we've definitely done it more so at the time of sale. I've done that a couple times. So when I've had properties, investment properties that we're selling, we'll sometimes say, hey, you know what, we're going to send a cleaning crew and we're going to give you a gift card to the SAQ to make sure the place is presentable for our visits for the weekend. And that way everyone can have a great time and then everyone's going to have a much better relationship and a happy kind of moving forward. But in general, for rental visits, no, I can't say I've ever sent in a cleanup crew entirely. There's places that have been very, very messy, and it kind of is what it is. And we hope that people can look past it, obviously, and see the good in the apartment. And there's some cases where you've simply said, you know what, it's going to be better to wait until this person leaves, gives it a full clean out. We waste, obviously, we're burning a month's rent, obviously, because it's going to be vacant for that month at very least. But
Right.
in its current state, we're just hurting ourselves. It's not going to do anybody any good.
To talk about what Robin says, there's landlord that not as good as you are because it seems so easy on your side to to get a new tenant and to get in good relation with your tenant. But I could understand sometimes if you're getting 20 visits at any times of the day almost, it could be complicated for certain
100%.
tenants.
Very complicated. Look, the reality is there's still a lot of slumlords in Montreal, and I use the expression sparingly, but there's a lot of properties that haven't been renovated in 30, 40, 50, 60 years. They've been collecting their check. They probably have the property paid off, so they don't really care. And, I mean, everything's broken, plumbing, electrical, whatever. The rental price obviously reflects that, so you're going to get a lot of visitors coming in. But if there's vermin, if there's issues like that, I mean, it's not going to work, right? So that's what's typically going to lead to longer lead times into rental, into more applications, into more visits, etc. But my philosophy is always, look, when we purchase a property, I typically go in and renovate it entirely from head to toe because I know that I'm guaranteeing myself less problems for the next 10 to 15 years at a minimum from a plumbing, electrical, roofing, etc. Right? We might wait a bit longer to do windows if they're okay, stuff of that nature. But by focusing on the main systems of the property, I'm just going to get less phone calls at midnight and everyone's going to be happier with the property.
As an investor, are you looking to flip your properties to hold them a long time? What's your philosophy as an investor, LJ?
So I like to apply the BRRRR method. It's all
Okay.
buy and holds, but essentially I will buy, I will renovate, I will then rent it out, I will then refinance it to recapture my capital, and then I repeat this process, right? So I follow the BRRRR method. I used to call it the rinse and repeat, and then Brandon Turner wrote a book about this. He's in Bigger Pockets. But that's my philosophy. Everything I've purchased is for my retirement. I get to live off of my operating income from my real estate business, property management, etc. And then my retirement fund will be my investments essentially.
The Burr method seems perfect for Montreal because it's so cold here most of the year. It makes sense that that's the strategy that you're following, LJ. You're listening to Under One Roof MTL on CJAD 800. Coming up, our property of the week. We'll get to that after we check traffic at the CJAD 800 Traffic Center with Jill Fitzgerald. I'm Robin, that's LJ, that's Martin, that's Fred. Still to come, we will have the answer to our trivia question of the week, but we always like to kick this segment off with our property of the week. Take it away, LJ.
This week, I want to highlight 5420 Rue Saint-Denis, Unit 208 in the Plateau Montreal. This one-bedroom unit has a dedicated driveway parking spot in the Plateau for only $350,000. This property was built in 1990 and makes for a great pied-à-terre or investment unit. The condo features a large bedroom and an oversized balcony facing Saint-Denis. My favorite restaurant in the area is Barranco, an excellent Peruvian restaurant. Check them out for their delicious varieties or cocktails. Being Peruvian myself, I give it my seal of approval.
Wow. LJ, you said the dedicated driveway parking spot in the Plateau. Wow, that's rare, no?
Can you believe that? It's very, very rare, especially for the price point. Typically, you're looking at over $450,000, $500,000 if you have parking. But this, honestly, it's a great little unit. Like I said, pied-à-terre if you want to come downtown from time to time, or even, obviously, if you want to live in it for longer term, students, investments, there's tons of options with it. And it's so close to so many important amenities and services.
And this is something that I've seen some family members do when their kids go to university away from home. Their parents will purchase a property for their child to live in, and then the equity that they make on that investment pays for their child's education when all is said and done. They get to reimburse themselves for what they spent on tuition. So buying a property for your teenager who's, 18, 19, going off to university is probably smart. You can fund their education that way.
That's exactly what this was. This is a client of mine. He's from BC. He came, his parents bought it, or he bought it more so when he was coming to university, I think to do a master's at the time, and then finished that up, went back to BC, had tenant in there for a couple of years because it was COVID and whatnot, and now he's ready to liquidate it, to purchase something back in BC. But even when I was in university, every single one of my friends whose parents purchased a property near the McGill Ghetto or somewhere around downtown to go to school effectively paid off their entire schooling with the appreciation of the property over that period, which was an incredible strategy.
LG, of course, if you think that it's $2,000 per month to rent, if you do your study on 4 years, you almost pay $100,000 in rent.
100%. Honestly, it's not far from that. Maybe $1,800 as a baseline, but something with parking alone. I mean, parking in that area is going to be at least $150, $200 a month. So there's a lot of upside potential for this property.
So would this be a good investment property if someone wanted to get a first property to invest and rent?
I think you could be,
because of the parking?
I think it could be a very good entrance into the market, 100%. I would still go in there, probably do a couple of renovations because it is original bathrooms, kitchens from 1990, which isn't that old. But what I do love about the year is that electrical and plumbing is up to today's standards, right? It's not 1950s plumbing or 1950s electrical. So it's all breaker panels, it's all ABS plumbing. So it's really just a facelift that we're looking at for the property.
Interesting. Guys, our trivia question of the week, I want to get to the answer. If you were paying attention, LJ did say the answer a little bit earlier in the show. So if you were listening closely, we did mention it. This is brought to you by Felix and Norton Cookies. By the way, you can visit their store at the Blue Haven Shopping Center, 3705 St. John's Boulevard in DDO. Question, what is the name of the government agency responsible for overseeing real estate transactions and enforcing regulations in Quebec? The OACIQ is the answer, or Organisme d'autoréglementation du courtage immobilier du Québec. We obviously will accept OACIQ, so thank you so much.
Robin, actually, I want to hear you say that 5 times now.
That's a tricky. Autoréglementation. That's a word and a half, guys. That's a tough one to get out. Guys, let's recap some of what we learned this week. We learned that it's a good idea for a landlord to have a good relationship with their tenant, even if their tenant is not renewing their lease. I learned that if I'm going to rent an apartment, I want to make sure that LJ is my landlord, or at the very least, my property manager, because it seems like he knows how to get stuff done. We also learned that when you are planning what to do with your assets, when you're planning your will, talk to your family. It's a difficult conversation to have. It's awkward. I know, both my parents have pulled me aside to talk about their wishes, and, I'm the executor for my mother's estate should something happen to her. It's a morbid conversation, but it's an important conversation to have, right, guys?
Well, I think it starts with having a will. And so don't procrastinate. So if you've got a bank account, you've got a house, you got a car, you got whatever, it's an asset, and you want to make sure that it's clear within the will, it's clearly identified who you want to leave this to. Because if you don't plan it out, you're creating a family battle after you pass.
My husband and I only got a will when we found out we were pregnant with my daughter. Like, once we had kids involved, that's when it became a top of mind priority for me. But prior to that, we still owned property. Like, I should have had a will long before I had one in place. I was concerned about what happens to my daughter. That's, I think, probably when most people start to consider a will. Is at that point.
Regularly with a lot of my friends and even clients, they've owned property for 4 or 5 years even, and then they have a kid. And then they say, LJ, what do I got to do? Who do I got to go see? And then I'll give them some referrals to some notaries, obviously, to take care of it, get it organized. But that's usually the biggest déclencheur, as they say, the trigger for that.
Fail to plan, plan to fail. So using an investment advisor is always a good idea. Not procrastinating about having a will, and having a detailed will, not some sort of thing that is going to be a huge debate for your heirs. I think that John really nailed it this afternoon by telling us that, it starts with that document.
Absolutely. Super important. That's pretty much it for us this week, guys. If you want, you can always find all episodes on the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. If you have any questions for us, or you just want to see our pictures, you can go to underoneroofmtl.com and you can direct your questions our way. In the meantime, LJ, where can people get in touch with you?
You can reach out to me on my website, ljrealties.com. You can also find me on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, and X, formerly Twitter. My handle is LJ Aguinaga on all of those platforms. Or for more information on our listings and real estate team under the handle LJ Realties, feel free to call or text me at 514-500-4040. We are looking for more real estate brokers to join our team. And if you need help with your property management, feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to help.
Amazing. Fred, Martin, where can people reach you?
Well, it's really simple. It's fredmartin.com. And when you call Fred or you call Martin, we answer the phone directly.
Which is nice. If you just want to hear your voice, have a chat.
Well, it's, after you deal with us, you keep our mobile phones, and if you ever need us, you just call us, and we always answer. It's either Fred and or Martin, so fredandmartin.com.
Awesome. I wanted to mention, if I can, I'm going to be doing a webinar in a few weeks. If we spoke about parents and people prioritizing their wills, I'm doing a webinar, Social Media 101 for Parents. All my friends are talking right now about how best to approach social media with their kids. Do you ban it entirely? Do you set limits, boundaries, what have you? I have a tech expert and a clinical psychologist joining me to really break down social media, teach parents everything they need to know, give you concrete examples and tips and tricks for how to handle this with your kids. So if you want more info, you can go to my website, robinflynn.com. If you missed anything, you can listen to this show in its entirety, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. For LJ, Fred, and Martin, I'm Robin. This has been Under One Roof MTL.